Okay, so I think we probably have everybody in now who's joining us. So let's get going. Welcome everyone to Commonplaces, the New Normal webinar. Today we're going to have a look at what does community engagement look like in a socially distanced society. Since COVID-19, the need for digital community engagement has rapidly increased. And that's whilst traditional face-to-face consultations has remained difficult and possibly become more difficult. Despite this challenging environment, some organisations have still managed to achieve outstanding levels of engagement. And in this webinar, we'll be hearing from two of those best practice examples. We'll be hearing from Scott Butterfield from Blackpool Council and Kasia Koziel from Sustrans. They'll be sharing their experiences of engaging communities over the past few months. And we'll also be hearing from Commonplaces CEO Mike Saunders. I'll be chairing today's webinar. My name's Rosa Bolger and I'm one of the local government leads with Commonplace. So today we'll explore how has COVID-19 changed the way we engage with our communities. We'll explore effective ways to engage people online. We'll look at some real life case studies of engaging communities during the pandemic, and we'll look at tactics for inclusive engagement. And we'll look at what's the future of what the future of engagement is proposed in the government's recent white paper. So just before we get going, before we meet our panelists, let's start with just a little housekeeping. Just to let you know, today's webinar is being recorded. So just be aware of that. It means you can watch it again later, or anyone that's missed it can catch up later on. We'll be running an online social media campaign during the webinar, so do join in. It's #NewNormalPlaces. And we do want this session to be interactive. So we'll post a few polls throughout that you'll be able to participate in, and hopefully we'll see some really interesting results there. The Q&A function will be up and running later on, and you'll be able to ask questions and then also upvote the questions that you want to hear answered. And within time restrictions, we hope to get to all those questions and see answers to them. So that's sort of enough from me. I think let's move on to our panelists. I'm really excited that we've got Scott Butterfield here today from Blackpool Council. Scott has been at Blackpool Council for 11 years. Helping the authority use evidence and research to guide its strategy and policy. Among other things, Scott and his team are responsible for consultation and engagement, ensuring that the voices from across the local community have an impact on decision making. Most recently, he's been in charge of engaging the community on Blackpool's Town Fund application to help crowdsource ideas that will help grow back stronger from the COVID-19 pandemic for the town and for its residents. At Commonplace, we've really enjoyed working closely with Scott and his team. So Scott, let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Rosa, for that introduction. Just by way of a beginning, I'm pleased to say as well that the photo that's just lifted from my LinkedIn profile was literally taken whilst I was actually engaging on the Towns Fund, and I think it was probably the last time I wore a suit. It just shows you how long ago this started. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm sure most of you don't need the introduction to Blackpool. We've got data that shows around 2/3 of all adults in Britain have visited Blackpool at some point in their life. And I guess this would usually be the opportunity for me to give you a bit of a sales pitch on how things have changed over the last 20 years and to encourage you to come back if you haven't already visited. But of course, with the context that we're in tier 3 lockdown, it's definitely a case that we're not able to kind of encourage people to come in the way that we would, but we all hope that you would make a trip next year and to see some of the fruits of our engagement activity. So it's a difficult place, but it's a beautiful place and it's a great place to work. You know, we've got a lot of social issues. We know that that's some of the things that the Town Fund is aiming to tackle. But there's a lot of optimism as well for the future there. And lots of private sector investment going on, lots of change happening, which the Towns Fund would really aim to catalyse. But I think one of the important things to say right up front is, in a place like Blackpool, coastal area, transient nature, we've got lots of houses of multiple occupation, people moving around. There's not perhaps, in some senses, that deeper sense of community in some parts of the town. There are in some of the fringe areas, but maybe not some of that deep sense of community. That is really the core purpose of the Towns Fund. It's all around trying to connect people in to the things that are happening in their town. Too often in the past, I think there's been regeneration schemes which have been well-meaning and been based on evidence and fantastic ideas, but they've not really had that sense of being of and for the community. Somewhere in Blackpool, that's particularly an issue, because actually the entire town was built as a tourist resort. People are used to serving people and helping them have a good time. But then what does that mean for the locals who are actually there 365 days a year living the experiences in the town? And that's really where our story with the engagement process here starts. It's around making sure that we give people that opportunity to connect in. And one of the examples of that, we've kind of been doing this for a few years now, particularly with the Towns Fund in mind. We started on this before the Towns Fund was even really in place, through a concept called the Town Deal, where we worked with our one of our charity partners, Business in the Community, on this idea of a prospectus for Blackpool, you know, a future vision. What would it be like in 10 years' time? And we tried to do some decent community engagement then, when it was all face-to-face. But the whole point of the ramping up of our engagement on the Town Deal was this idea of how quickly can we get into that deeper form of engagement. And so we were starting that conversation. And then, of course, COVID hit, and we were in the situation where we needed to think differently about how we did this. So our starting point was, we need to do something. We need to do something deep, but we also need to do something different. We need to do something which gets people ownership of the solutions. It's a bottom-up as much as it is a top-down process. We've got some good examples in the town of how this has worked. Our engagement on our museum, which is coming in 2021, which is called Showtown, and looks absolutely fantastic. That was all built from the bottom up with the community. It was starting from the idea that self-actualization is the key for people feeling pride in their areas and feeling control over their lives. And so they had a massive kind of engagement process, numerous sessions, thousands of people attending face-to-face in some of our heritage assets. And that's been building a museum that, yes, people want to come to from the outside and pay money to go and see, but it's also something that local people can take pride in. So as an exemplar of the kinds of things that this is all aimed at doing, that's really it. So this process, we engaged an organisation called Locality. You can see their logo on, and they were the ones who actually brought Commonplace to our attention. So we wanted to straddle the two things, doing digital as well as we could, and doing face-to-face engagement wherever possible. Clearly, face-to-face wasn't really ever on the table. So what Locality did, which was really helpful and really fits the spirit of the Town Fund, was they got in contact with our local council for voluntary services, got some of their volunteers to kind of actually undertake a series of phone interviews to replace that face-to-face element, which dealt neatly with the idea that we knew not everybody was going to be able to engage digitally, which was always going to be our main focus. So we had a series of kind of engagement activities going on at the same time. Where possible, we were getting people over the phone to kind of feed in views that could feed into this tool. But otherwise, it was about promoting on social media and getting the biggest possible audience for the engagement activity. Now, one of the things that I particularly got a lot of value out of with Commonplace tool is there's two dimensions to it. You can see on this slide, you've got the tiles, which is what we did was a thematic engagement exercise, where we really wanted to keep it as broad as possible for everybody to engage with these topics under their own volition. But then on the next slide, what we can see is the mapping side of things as well, which is where that idea of being able to see the entire town and zoom in and zoom out, know where you live and know where some of the issues are that you wanted to address locally, that was going to be really crucial in making sure we gave people the scope and the space to comment. And what I would say is, this got us an entirely new audience. You can see some of the stats there. So we had 6,600 people who came to learn more about the project, of which we got I think it was about 1,100 participating, and some of them obviously making multiple contributions, as you can see from the stats there. But one of the things for us was there was such a contrast between the engagement on Facebook and the engagement on Commonplace. So on Facebook, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it, you occasionally kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to something and type something that's a bit snarky or a little bit kind of edgy, and it won't really necessarily move the debate on. It's not the best place to kind of have a nuanced debate. What we found when we got into the data underneath Commonplace was people were being critical by all means, and they were being supportive in other areas, but they had this space, something about that space really enabled that conversation to take place in a much more reasonable manner, in a way that felt much more like the kind of face-to-face dialogue. Even though it wasn't two-way interactive, it really did sort of get much richer data out of the engagement process than maybe we'd expected to do so. We'll go on to the next slide, please. This is where some of our data, you can see there that some of the topics are quite broad. I'm really pleased to say that of those broad areas, all of them made their way into our town deal submission in some form or another. It was really about getting as much rich data, and I think what we wanted to do was build up a source of information that we can keep returning to. I think quite often you see engagement as a linear process, and actually it tends to be much more iterative, the good ones, where you can always go back to the ideas you've gathered, if they're gathered in the right way, and use some of the subtlety in that to influence where the project goes next. Because what we need to do next, and this is the plan, is we're going to recast the Commonplace slightly with details of the schemes that we're working on, and get to a point where we're getting much more specific in the kinds of questions we're asking people. Now, I haven't said too much yet about the full kind of sweep of where we're going with this. So the Town Deal Fund, and it's a great idea for any kind of engagement activity. They wanted a stakeholder engagement plan, which really mapped out from start to end who you were bringing on board, when you were bringing them on board, in what way you were going to keep them involved, how the communication was going to flow, what specific mechanisms you were seeking to use to achieve that. And I think that really helped shape our thinking around these two ideas that we came up with in our plan, which is a people's panel and stakeholders panel. This idea that through the first stage of the engagement exercise, I think we've got about 450 people who say they want to be involved in future. So we've got a great core there. But at the end of the day, this is a project that's all about connecting people with the things that are happening in their town. So we'd be missing the trick if we weren't constantly trying to bring new people on board into that kind of grouping, particularly thinking about our young people in Blackpool, where in terms of aspirations, there's lots of work going on around building resilience and giving people a better start in life. But it's those people who are going to own the town in the future, you'd hope, and so they also need to own the solutions. So this entire kind of plan is really based on bringing people in, keeping them there, involving them in a way that's useful to them, involving different groups to a greater degree depending on the particular scheme that we're looking at, and then coming out at the end of it with some really good kind of information that the scheme leads can use to take and shape and refine the specific activity that's actually underway. If we go on to the next slide, please. So the next stage really with us is we're going to build on that stakeholder engagement plan with a lot more detail, and that's something that we're going to be working on over the next couple of months, which is in line with the timescale we've been given for the town deal. Because as you can see from this slide, and you might have picked up on the news, in a fit of amazing timing, this never happens. Actually, we've been awarded 39.5 million of our ask on the Towns Fund. We haven't got specific details of which of our schemes have made it in and which haven't yet. And there's still a conversation to go on about which schemes might need to be tweaked or changed in line with what we've been awarded the funding for. But obviously, a fantastic kind of result for us. And I think one which really does bear the value of engagement out, because throughout our dialogue, one of the things that they've said is they've been particularly impressed with, given the difficulties of a digital engagement because of the circumstances we're in, how we've really tried to overcome that. And I think there's a lot of kind of deeper kind of philosophical questions for engagement professionals around this, around, well, can online engagement ever be as fundamental and deep as face-to-face engagement? And I think it can be, it's just in a different way. I think as long as you've got a way of thinking through the implications of how you're showing something online, or inviting people to be involved in that way, and tailoring it to fit your needs, I think that you can get an engagement exercise that's much more worthwhile. I think it's something that people expect now, and I think it's certainly affected our attitudes at the council to digital engagement. From a point where we were, and obviously bearing in mind Blackpool's social context, we obviously have high levels of digital exclusion, which has been we were really conscious of. But our town deal board said, look, you've got to go for this. You've got to get a big audience. Why not go down this route? We've got new people responding who wouldn't traditionally get involved in engagement activities. So I think we kind of flipped our view on it. So corporately, we need to think about what digital engagement first means, while still finding a way of bringing other people along to be involved in that process, and even doing some work with them to develop digital skills at the same time. I mean, we're just looking at, we appointed FutureGov to run a citizens' assembly for us on the climate emergency that we've declared, and all of the thinking there isn't about how do we involve people in a non-digital way. It's about how can we support people to be involved in a digital way, in a way which leaves them a legacy of skills. So that's kind of where we're at in Blackpool. I guess what I've been a bit light on is kind of my top tips for engagement, and maybe that's something we'll get into in the panel discussion. But I think whatever your engagement initiative, the idea of planning it out in the stakeholder engagement plan, who you're engaging with, why you're doing it, when you're doing it, is really crucial. And my top tip for getting that plan right is, when I'd sort of finished the plan, what I found was I was skimming over bits of it when I was rereading it. I was thinking, oh yeah, no, that's fine. And it was those things that ended up being the things that I was challenged on. So I think my only tip on that would be, when you've read your document and when you've finished it and you think everything's good, think about the things you've ignored and go back and just spend another sort of 5-10 minutes fleshing those out, and then you'll get to the best possible design for your engagement process. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Scott. It's really interesting to hear, particularly how much community engagement and the data from that really came into your project, and really was a huge part of it. That was really, really great to hear. A couple of questions for you, if I may. I'd like to know a little more about what are the benefits you've seen with engaging the community online, and then also if you can tell us a little bit about how you worked with locality to listen to the voices of the people that weren't digitally engaged.
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, what the main benefit of engaging online in this way has been the quality of the discourse. We've got such rich commentary out of this. There was, in fact, one of my major issues, because we wanted to make sure that the board, town deal board, had access to as much information as possible. So obviously, locality did as a summary report. My team did some additional analysis on it, but we wanted the actual words to go in front of the town deal board for them to read. And it was so rich, and people were giving so much of themselves that one of the major challenges was redacting it all to take all of the personal information out of it, because people really invested in it to a degree that I've not seen, certainly through online surveys, even any kind of other engagement activity, even in some ways more than face-to-face, because actually what you had here was people who might not be comfortable in a face-to-face environment having free rein to be able to think about their answers and really commit quite a lot of time and energy into providing us with some really good information. So I think that's one side of it. I think the numbers, certainly, it's been the biggest online engagement exercise I've been involved with at Blackpool. We've had bigger face-to-face exercises, as I've said, with the Showtown Museum, but that was easy because you kind of went into town on a busy August day and literally funneled people into the Winter Garden, which is one of our kind of major heritage attractions, and engaged them in that way. But there was no hope we could have done that with those kinds of numbers in this context. I think in terms of your other question, the outreach, I mean, I think really what locality did brilliantly was they understood that in this kind of time, what you need to do is make the most of your existing networks and community assets. So they actually did a community asset mapping exercise for us, which will feed into the stakeholder engagement plan. But what they were able to do was, through going through the CVS and getting some of their volunteers involved, they were reaching out to some of our, I hate the term hard to reach, seldom heard groups. So groups with protected characteristics from inequalities point of view. In Blackpool, there's a lot of deprived communities who wouldn't traditionally get involved in these kinds of exercises. So by doing that, by using local contacts and local knowledge and making phone calls out to people, they were able to engage people in a much more rich way to support the work that was being undertaken through the digital means.
Fantastic. Thanks for going into that a little deeper there, Scott. Thank you. Let's do a poll now. Let's have a look at, I think if I stop sharing my screen here, let's have a look at a poll. So I think Fred, working in the background, is going to throw one up brilliantly. So are you more willing now than 6 months ago to embrace different ways of engaging the public? Yes, no, or unsure? And you should all be able to respond to that online. So we'll just give that a few minutes for you to have a think about that. Are you more willing now than 6 months ago to embrace different ways of engaging the public? Yes, no, or not sure? Okay, fantastic. That's just the result we want to see. So 92% saying yes, 2% saying no, and 7% saying unsure. That's some really good results there. Fantastic. So now I'd like to let's move on to our next panelist. We're really pleased to have Kasia with us here today from Sustrans. Kasia is responsible for the development and delivery of collaborative street design projects across Scotland to transform neighbourhoods and urban spaces. Sustrans collaborative design puts people who use the streets at the heart of designing solutions to the local issues and planning livable neighbourhoods for everyone. Kasia has been specifically responsible for the planning, the management and the delivery of the Wick street project in the Scottish Highlands. Since September, her team have been working with the community to understand issues and aspirations for the town centre and then transferring them into concept designs that her team have produced. So Kasia, if I hand over to you now, thanks for joining us.
That's what happens, you keep talking to yourself. Good morning, everyone, once again. You should be able to see my screen now. Is that correct, Rosa? Yes.
Yes, looks great. Looks great.
Yes, no, thank you. Yes, so my name is Kasia Koziel. It's a pleasure today to be here and share my experience of working with communities. The current pandemic is challenging time to engage with communities with lack of face-to-face interactions. A great example from Scott sharing about Blackpool consultations and engagement, there's a number of evidence and examples showing community empowerment and people coming together to respond to the challenges of the pandemic. So it really, although it is challenging, there are people who want to be part of the change. So I've been invited by the Commonplace team today to share about our recent engagement for our project in Wick in the Scottish Highlands. So I'll first start, just for those who don't know Sustrans. We are the charity making it easier for people to walk and cycle, and a street design program is one of many things that we do. But particularly with street design program in Scotland, we empower communities to transform the neighbourhoods and urban spaces. We aim to build stronger communities, have more people walking, cycling and wheeling, and create better quality places. It's 10 years since we started the program as a Sustrans, so there's lots of learning, and every year with a new projects, we just learn more and try new engagement methods. But in our work, what is vital is to involve those who live, work and travel through an area in the design process, so that the changes responds to the challenges that they face every day when using the area. So we apply collaborative design approach, known as well as a co-design approach. And this approach is used to unlock the needs, concerns and ideas of the local community. And with help from our designers, facilitators, we transform it into the concept design. So we work to deliver as well inclusive design process. We assess and improve the street environment, working with users of different abilities, backgrounds, and ages. And the Wick Street Design project started last year in September. So actually we didn't start in the time of the pandemic, but we started earlier in September. That actually led to we continued in pandemic time. So we've been working on the project with the Highland Council and Wick Community Council with the aim to redevelop Wick High Street and make it more vibrant, accessible and welcoming for people to move through and spend time in. For those that do not know where Wick is, I've got a map. It's north of Scotland in the Scottish Highlands. And our team is based in Edinburgh. So perspective of working on the project in Wick last summer was very exciting, but we also knew that travel distance might be a challenge. For many projects, we can just jump on the train and go to the project area, work locally with people. With Wick, we had 8 to 9 hours journeys ahead every time that we needed to be. So we knew that we had to really adapt to remote working already in September. And these experiences have been really useful over last month during the pandemic. At the beginning of when we started the project, we conducted similar things as Scott mentioned, stakeholder mapping, community analysis. These are kind of things that they should continue in the pandemic. For example, we learned through community analysis that over 20% of the population are people over 60 years old, while only 8% are people from 16 to 24 years old. And that helped us to decide on engagement methods to suit different demographics. And our stakeholder mapping help us identify groups with who consult with and engage throughout the project. I think the challenge for us is as well the fact that we are not local in the projects that we work. So therefore we need really help from people that live in the area. So we also spoke to our partners. They help us identifying a local organization and residents who joined the steering group. They had an interest in the project and they've contributed extremely with the local knowledge and help us promote the project. So actually when we started kind of in-person engagement in October, that lasted till February. We visited Wick a few times and we conducted kind of in-person engagement. We also used a commonplace heat map. You can have a look on it. It's linked in the, you can see on the slide. So we used the feedback to the heat map to collect the feedback on community, on barriers to moving around and spending time in the town centre. And knowing that the large proportion of the community are elderly people, we also developed an offline version of the commonplace heat map in the form of paper survey that you can see on the picture. And activities we delivered, kind of in-person activities, were walking out at some interactive workshop events. But we also linked to the topics that people wanted to talk about. So a Wick is rich in heritage and in history, and people really feel proud of that. So we'll link to that topic, and we conducted a heritage workshop to learn more and see how we can incorporate a heritage into kind of built environment. And these events and activities enable us to meet local people and understand the issues they face and inspiration they had for the town centre. Obviously, these days with pandemic, it's difficult and it's even impossible to meet people in person. Technology and online engagement is there to be used, but it's really vital to collaborate with groups that are still active and they keep regular contact with people. They really can help reach out to people. That even can be an organization that, for example, there's a food packages that delivers to vulnerable people. Why not put that, we've used some of these kind of in Wick as well. So when the lockdown came in March, our team was preparing for the next stage, to go to Wick and to conduct consultation on the proposed designs and collect feedback. Due to the pandemic, we had to suspend the project, and with partners, we decided to postpone till autumn this year. At that time, everyone hoped maybe pandemic will be good. So I think it was important that we posted information about these changes to the project, and we contacted people, reassuring the community that they will have still opportunity to comment on designs, but at the later stage. So in July, we started working again on the project. The pandemic wasn't away, and so we knew face-to-face engagement wasn't possible. So to ensure that as many people as possible were able to have their voices heard, we plan a use of combination of online and offline activities, as many of you know, as a blended engagement. So a couple of examples of what we did. First of all, we used local project champions, members of steering group, to help us promoting the project and distribute promotion materials across the town. You can see some pictures. I mean, the information of the project was very visible, straight into people's eyes if they are walking through the town center or if they're doing a shopping in the local supermarket. We use the Commonplace project website to showcase the designs and collect comments from people. But for those with limited access to technology, again, we produced the paper surveys. They were distributed at key locations around the town. We also added a free post envelope so people didn't have to pay for the stamp. It's a simple thing, but that helps to get more surveys back. We distributed materials specifically to business owners in the project area that would be impacted with the changes. And we also hosted a webinar that was open to all residents and business owners. That gave people the chance to engage with us directly, ask questions and share the views. And that webinar, as many of these days, where it was available online for people to watch afterwards. And finally, you can see that picture from BBC Alba mentioning Wick High Street regeneration. We contacted the press, we contacted the TV, we contacted local newspapers, radio, and they covered the stories. They really want to new stories and positive stories to talk about. So the level of responses we received was very good, and overall feedback of proposed designs was positive. Within 3 weeks, we received 449 comments, and over 50% of these were submitted through the paper survey. I think, again, it shows that some people are not able, could not maybe comment if it was only online. I think interesting point as well, one of the results was that the business owners in the project area and around, the increase of responses was really higher. So it was around 13%. But in October, when we did the first kind of consultation data gathering, we only had 3% of responses from businesses. So we really recognize the increase, especially from businesses, from this engagement of really reaching out to them. So kind of summarizing, based on that engagement, I've put a couple of key points. Many of these points are actually just remaining from pre-pandemic engagement that really can help us these days to build on. First of all, speak to local people and other stakeholders to understand local perspective and needs. Collaborate with existing groups, join the activities, and link to the things that are important for them. For us, it was Heritage of Wick to link into, and that helped us to reach more people. Communicate why your project is happening, how this will impact people, and what actually you're going to do. When using use a combination on offline and online mediums and resources to ensure no one is excluded. As I said, local presses are looking for positive stories, but when you're doing your online activities, make sure they're as inclusive as possible. That might be run a through presentation with your few people, see if it's easy to read. Don't make it too colorful. It is nice, but it's harder for people to read. Use the captioning function, for example, in your presentation, so people not only can listen, but they can read what you're saying. And I think create an environment that is welcoming for people. So if you're creating those opportunities for people that they joining to speak to you, try to make environment and bring that feel of engagement in person. That can be a simple icebreaker, just a comfort break during your 1 hour and a half or 2 hours of session, or even an hour. Or just kind of some decoration in your room, just to give a bit of feel that is not only a computer that you're looking at. Take time. I think we learn a lot. The preparation for online activities took much more time than we would spend preparing for going and talking to people in person, because everything is much more structured. We as well, our team did a few trial sessions with colleagues. So not only we could practice, but we could also get people to feedback on, are we asking right question, but as well, is there enough time we allowing people to speak, to respond, because obviously there's time limitations. And I think the last one is show your face. I mean, a lot of these engagements and consultations are happening with just a name of people. It's local council, it's this and this group, Sustrans. I mean, put your face there. Record a video talking to community, encouraging them to give their vote, have they say, to share their feedback, or at least put up photos of the team that is working on the project so that they can recognize that at the end of the day, they're a human being behind that project. And what we're working is for making a positive change. So yeah, so that's really from me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kasia. It's really great to hear how that's all worked out. For me, it's particularly interesting to hear how the community engagements worked out in a rural area. I'm in Oxfordshire, and I'm always interested in how you engage in more rural areas where it tends to be more difficult. Kasia, there's a couple of questions that have come directly to you, so if we can just go through them now, that would be really great. So this question comes from Laurie. Where can community development trusts find co-design tools, and how well do these tools translate to engagement during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a lot online these days. I don't have any specific resources to say this is where you can use. I think putting participatory design, you'll start kind of finding. I can have a look and share after the webinar a couple of links. I think so that's about the tools. What was the second part of the question? Because it was quite a long question.
And how do these tools translate to engagement during the pandemic?
Yes, how do they translate? I think they very important. They still very up to date. I think they still can be used. Certain tools are a bit more difficult because a lot of collaborating. I mean, even if you look on the pictures, they required a bit of more in-person engagements where people, like, we used a kind of model kit that people can move at the figures. But there are ways kind of to do certain things. We are currently working on a new project to start a new project with different local authorities, and we are looking at how we can do it. For example, one of the things is a walking audits that we do. We normally go and take people for a walk. Currently, we're translating that into kind of more an online resource. So we will put the kind of questions and the route and the locations, print them and send them to organizations that can have volunteers to kind of go and do that walking audit. So it's really the collaborative designs tools are there to be used. Some of them might need to have kind of rethinking about how we can use them more online when we cannot have that interaction with people.
Fantastic, wonderful. There's a question here, Kasia, as well. A really good question. How do you manage the expectations among the respondents regarding for realization and relating timeframes to the proposed design?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's two things that I actually can mention here. First of all, regarding the expectation, since the very beginning, we always kind of make it clear that of the timescales that are possible, how long things can take, and kind of what are the next stages. For that particular project in Wick, we really were kind of leading on the concept design phase of the project. And then the detailed design and construction is something that we hand over to the local authority working with kind of community council. So I think it's very important to be clear from the beginning. I mean, obviously people want to see a change very quickly, but part of that as well was we've done some small interventions at the ground at the very beginning. So just to kind of showcase that the change is possible and kind of just more to show that the positive change can happen. So one of the things was we put some planters and bench in the local in the project area. And one of the things that we heard was that's going to be vandalized immediately. A year later, it's still there in a good condition. So I think that has really showed the people that this change is possible. And when it comes to, you see, again, I lost that, but I can see the question. The second part of the question was, apologies.
No problem. Let's have a look. It's regarding the possibilities for realizing
proposed designs. Yeah, and I think the other thing I want to say was around managing expectation. That's less about timeframes. Obviously, for our project was very specific about really redesigning the street environment, and there were other issues coming up that are challenges in Wick, like empty vacant shops. So again, from the very beginning, we kind of had to really showcase that there are problems that we cannot resolve as a project, and these problems needs to be overlooked. So we really work closely with local councillors who are leading on the regeneration of the town centre in Wick, and they were picking up on other challenges. So that was really, in a way, was really supportive for us, because there were other things happening that we could link and pass the comments on. But equally, community really wanted to see those things happening alongside as our work happens. So I think it's really be open and be honest. Do not promise too much if you know this is something that your project cannot respond. If you can find another organization that can look into that challenges or can help with the time frameworks, do that. But I think that managing of expectation is something that it always will be a challenge with the communities.
Fantastic. I'm conscious of time, but there's one more great question here that I'd like to ask you, if that's okay. It's from Philip Watt, and he says, do you think you had a better or more positive engagement as Sustrans rather than if the local council were leading the project?
Right, so yeah, we were leading on that project, but we worked very closely with local authority, and I think without kind of having support from the local authority, local councillors who were very supportive of the project, and with community council, we wouldn't be able to do as much, because we are kind of an external organization that we're not local. Having a people with local knowledge, like local authority, other community, a group, local councillors, is very important because they know the people, they have connections. But that as well can work a bit more sometimes negative, because some people are very skeptical about local authority, because they all say, oh, we've been asking for that for ages, why it will suddenly happen. So I think having us as an in-between kind of connection, it does really happen. One of the things that I've heard over the last 2 years when I'm working on the street design project is that I know we do put a lot of time and local and resources to do that kind of meaningful engagement, and spend lots of time. And local authorities not necessarily have these resources available and so much time. So I think that local authorities could do that. I think the challenge is that it's the time consuming. So I think working in the partnership can actually benefit even more.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kasia. It's really, really great to have you today. Really great to hear from you. Let's move on to our next panelist. We've got Mike with us today. Mike is the CEO of Commonplace. I'm just bringing my screen share back up for you there. You should be able to see that. Mike is the CEO of Commonplace, and he's been a digital pioneer and entrepreneur for over 20 years, developing innovative digital business across media, public and the commercial sectors for organisations from such as Sony PlayStation all the way over to Kew Gardens. He's built several startups as well as working in central government. Mike is a non-executive director of Trinity College in London and has previously served as a member of the Speaker's Advisory Committee on Public Engagement in Parliament and of ActionAid's Digital Advisory Board. So Mike, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosa, and huge thank you to Scott and Kasia for really insightful thoughts. I think the projects you talked about are truly inspiring examples of what's possible. And I guess I'm picking up on a few of the themes that you've talked about. So Scott, right at the beginning, talked about changes of and for the community. And Kasia talked about co-design, which puts people who use the streets in that case at the heart of the process. If I could have the first slide, please, Rosa. The idea of new normal has been used an awful lot over the past months. And then we're speaking at a time still when there's huge uncertainty about how long COVID is going to last. So I think it's still too early to put any kind of definition on what new normal means, but we have seen some clear trends, and we've seen them consistently at Commonplace. And I think the two that I wanted to talk about are firstly a shift towards digital. Scott talked about digital first in engagement, but actually much more broadly, people using digital technologies across all walks of life because of social distancing. And that's led to higher levels of confidence. You know, more people used to using digital tools. It's led to even greater use of social media, even more discussions on social media. And in the context of community engagement, I think has brought about this kind of fundamental shift and a realization that digital has a really, really important role to play. It isn't everything, and integrating digital and face-to-face, I think, is and will remain hugely important. And the second trend is around community connections. And I think, you know, we've seen an increase in the energy, the enthusiasm of people wanting to engage and connect with their communities and with their local places. There's perhaps a sense of a greater attachment, people are spending more time in them. And they, you know, they want to have a greater voice, therefore, in what's going on. Could you move to the next slide, please, Rosa? So we've certainly witnessed a step change in the this digital first approach that Scott mentioned. The graph highlights the total number of people on our project sites throughout the pandemic. And we've also seen a dramatic increase in the number of projects that we're running. So 64 projects with local authorities around COVID. So this is a, you know, this is a significant increase for us, and indeed in a kind of acceleration. So, you know, in total now we have over 2 million people who've used Commonplace. And we're also attracting a new and very different type of audience. So 70% of our respondents are under the age of 45. So, you know, this has been happening alongside this more general increase and shift in the use of the internet, use of smartphones, social media. But we're still seeing increasing and indeed a kind of acceleration in this use. And the next slide, please. So the current situation is presenting many challenges for many organisations, many communities around the built environment, but it's also providing some great opportunities to adapt to the way the communities and stakeholders are engaging on proposals for change, whether those are development proposals, transport proposals, walkable neighbourhoods, and so on. And it's also presenting opportunities to understand more about what people think about their current environment. And we set up with a number of partners, including the London Collective, City of London, Authority Siemens, and the Frank Bruno Foundation, amongst others, a project called Park Power. And this was, the idea behind it was to look at how people use and view their parks. It was part of the London Festival of Architecture, so in this case focused on London. And we simply asked them a question which was, what do you think about the future of your local park? I thought was actually a lot. So you can see the map there with all of the comments on it. We had over 9,000 people who interacted with the Park Power website. And we've identified an accelerating need for these spaces, particularly to enable people to escape. And we're going to be launching a report from the Park Power project in a couple of weeks' time and previewing it next week, actually, at the London conference, if any of you are attending that. So as I said, on Commonplace, we've had over 300,000 responses from communities all around the country relating to changes during the COVID pandemic. And we've done also some research on our own users. So we know that 89% of people on Commonplace who have responded want to know more about projects that they can influence in their area. That's, you know, 9 out of 10 people want to know more, want to be involved more. And over half the people who've responded to Commonplace feel more connected to their neighbourhood directly as an outcome of having used Commonplace as part of for more engagement and for using digital tools. And this re-energised sense of community, I think, is starting to take a hold across the board. And it's something that I think is really, really exciting, and it's I think a key component of what the new normal, I think, will look like. And the next slide, please. So as a result, the rules of engagement are changing. it's increasingly clear to us that box checking consultations where plans are really just published to comply is no longer really an option. Rosa, could you move on to the next slide? Thanks. These kind of publication and compliance, if you like, engagements. Oh, sorry, I think we've moved on to. Thank you. The danger of them is that they can destroy trust, and we know from research such as Rosa's research that there's a trust deficit. What we propose and what we're seeing from projects like Scots and Kasia's is a more open discussion that if it doesn't happen on something like Commonplace, it's going to happen anywhere on Facebook or Instagram and Twitter. And by having a very, very open approach to engagement and consultation, you can get in the community on side. So community engagement is a huge opportunity in this era of rapid change around the new normal. Those organisations in the built environment who can find a way of using this are going to derive huge benefits from it. And what we have found is that using tools like Commonplace, we get 2/3 of respondents on Commonplace end up supporting proposals for change because the proposals are being presented in open, meaningful ways and giving them a real opportunity to influence them. Sorry, Rosa, and the next slide, please. So we've seen this and similar trends reflected in the government's Future of Planning white paper, which lays out an ambitious set of plans to build better and to build faster. And encouragingly, they've recognised that good, meaningful community engagement in planning is essential to achieve this. So they've identified digital as the key route to achieving it, citing an interactive map-based online system that places planning at the fingertips of the people. And we believe that a digital-first approach will always include non-digital engagement. And moreover, we believe that some of the most innovative thinking and services will come from the way that digital and non-digital engagements are integrated together. But this digital-first approach looks like being gradually transferred into the guidance and legislation. And certainly we can see the evidence of it being here to stay. Thanks, Rosa, and the next one. But how do we get the most out of our engagements with the community using digital? Well, I think of technology not even as a solution, but more like a tonic. It's part of the solution, but there are 3 observations I'd like to share with you just to finish up. The first is about embracing open. I think embracing open is a game changer because by being completely open with the way engagement works, there's a huge opportunity to generate trust in a way that's never been seen before. And it's why so many people have commented on the Commonplaces during lockdown. The second is that through this openness, we can create a shared collective understanding of needs. We can form a collective view based on all the data that has been collected and shared. And in the literal sense, that so many people have contributed. So this can create much more informed decisions. And the third is about accelerating collaboration. So digital has got a huge role to play in helping bring people on this journey. Sometimes, not always, people might start from a position of skepticism or sometimes resistance. But when they're listened to and they participate, and as Scott and Kasia have said, they're right at the centre of the process, they become constructive collaborators. And the last slide, please, Rosa. So, as I've said, the balance of engagement is moving towards digital, but we still need to recognise that community engagement requires more than just a one-size-fits-all approach. There are going to be groups who can't access the internet, and it's important that they still have the opportunity to voice their views and opinions. And as Kasia has so effectively demonstrated, the new normal is still going to require traditional paper-based methods to complement digital engagement. And I think, as I said previously, how we integrate those seamlessly is going to be a really, really important part of what happens next. So what will the new normal look like? I think it looks like a world where community enabled change delivers better places to live. One of the great examples of what can be achieved is still the projects that we worked on with Waltham Forest Council on their plans for Mini Holland. With over 50,000 people involved in the borough, the programme delivered with community support, and the benefits for the borough have been shown through a King's College piece of research, that the improved air quality just as a result of that programme will lead to 42,000 years of extra human life. And if we're talking about collaboration, one of the more pleasing aspects of that project was also that the community who collaborated in the engagement are now volunteering to help maintain some of the new spaces that have been produced. So we think this is a moment where things can really change. Community engagement accelerated by platforms such as Commonplace, and the impact of these ongoing open conversations can be a positive impact on delivering better places, better parks, transport, walkable, cyclable neighbourhoods and homes. And these are some of the positive things that we think the new normal can and will become. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mike. That's really great to hear all that from you. I'm quite conscious on time. We've only got a few minutes left, and I'm determined to wrap up by 10 o'clock as promised. So there's quite an important question here, I think, about accessibility that I'd like to ask. And Mike, maybe you'd like to answer this about what we're doing at Commonplace. It says, I'm interested, this is from Sam, it says, I'm interested to hear how we make sure mapping services are accessible for people because they're not easy for people with visual impairments or mobility issues. The question's disappeared from me, but that was the gist of it.
Yeah, accessibility is a huge issue, and we at Commonplace have done a lot of work making sure that our platforms are accessible to screen readers and other tools that are used to make sure that everybody can access the technology. I think, you know, as well as the kind of uptake of digital during COVID, I think the understanding of accessibility and the way that accessibility is being delivered in these platforms has accelerated as well. So I think that that's really good news. But going back to Kasia's point, I think, you know, making sure that there are alternative non-digital ways that people can engage as well is equally important. And the point that I made a couple of times is that the way that these things integrate, so the way that the whole experience digitally and non-digitally works together, I think is a super, super important part of making accessibility, you know, top of the list and making these experiences and opportunities accessible to everybody.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to wrap up there. It's about 1 minute to 10. So just a huge panelists for joining us today. It's really lovely, particularly. So, and of course, thanks Mike for joining us as well, and to everyone that joined and listened. And thanks for participating in our polls and with our questions. So I hope you all go on and enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks so much.